It's a pleasure to be joining you this morning. And yeah, we are going to be talking about where regulation meets AI. It's sort of one of those topics that everybody is asking about and wanting to know where things are going. So let's take it from the very, very top. When we're talking about global regulations, we're seeing sort of a bit of a play between countries that actually want to be out there and the leaders in what AI is actually doing versus those that are setting, I guess, the regulatory landscape. And it's not just regulation, because right now we've got three countries vying for the top three spots. We've got the US, China sitting kind of 1 and 2 and being back and forth, and you've got the UK very much sitting in the third position in terms of a country wanting to push AI innovation. Now, when it comes to regulation, though, the one that's setting out the furthest in terms of setting out a very specific regulation or law specific to AI, it has to be Europe and the European Union specifically around the EU Artificial and Intelligence Act. In a lot of the other countries, we're not seeing the same level of regulation being rolled out. We're seeing them place reliance on either existing type of laws or standards or guidelines that are out there. So take, for example, you've got Italy in the European region. They're heavily relying on what you see around EU data privacy laws and other things about training of particular data and consumer rights. And that's how they're sitting there and governing what's happening around what AI is actually doing. We've got similar countries like Australia that is heavily focused on a principles-based approach. So it's not specific regulation right now, but it's very principles-driven. They're also moving towards putting in some sort of safety guardrails that is going to be out there for industry where they consider them to be high-risk AI applications. In other sort of sectors of the world, if we sort of move around the world sort of globally, we can see that Singapore, while it doesn't again have any specific AI regulation, they are using sectorial laws in a different way to help govern what's actually happening in that spot. And in particular, if we link that one back to financial crime, we very much see the key regulator there, the MAS, doing a lot to support what's happening in AI innovation and development, but in a very safe and principles-based manner. Now, when it comes to sort of the other side of the globe, the US, Canada, North America, those type of countries, again, nothing there on a federal level. But we are starting to see certain states that are bringing in elements around AI safety. We've seen some executive orders come out through the administration and moving through some of those areas. Canada is also one of the countries that has a particular directive been out there for a few years now. They are looking to extend what's happening in that particular area around particularly the decision-making capabilities that we're seeing in AI. So it's not so much what we've seen in the past around sort of certain machine learning outcomes. It's really about what's happening in generative AI and the large language model sort of area. I sort of might put it there. I'm expecting we'll get a number of questions coming out. One thing I will sort of just draw your attention to when it comes to sort of standard setting is it's not just a country sort of or federal level regulation that we're seeing out there. There's also a lot of other things and laws that are coming out that are a bit more specific around AI. So whether it's like copyright litigation or if it's more to do with data privacy, we're seeing a lot of those elements start to creep into what's influencing what's happening on the regulatory side of it. We're very much sitting there watching it. We're very much tapped into even what's happening at a standard, so a non, say, legislative perspective here. So things like the NIST framework. They brought out, I think about 2022, they brought out an AI risk management framework. It was a second draft. I know there's talk about refreshing that. You've got the blueprint for the AI Bill of Rights that came out from the US. So we've got a lot of things sort of driving in the background. And on top of that, we've now got country level, initiatives and plans being set out. The UK is a great example of that. They recently issued out as part of sort of their AI plan that they want to start to introduce a particular way of governing the AI risks that are actually being brought out by industry. And that means big tech industry, but it also means how it applies to particular institutions and enterprise level. But moving on, if I can get the slides to advance. The next sort of question comes down to, well, what are the regulators doing in our particular segment around financial crime, around fraud, around economic crime? Well, their sentiment is very much a mixed one. So when I talk about the regulators, I really mean the FS regulators here. And what we start to see is there is an appetite for potential of what AI can actually do, what it can bring, not only for how institutions can actually use it, and they are very much trying in certain pockets of different countries across the globe to understand what those use cases are and how do they actually look at that from a supervisory perspective. But it's also they're starting to look at it internally themselves of how they use it. And I think that's sort of a great step forward in terms of how we communicate as an industry back to the regulators in that particular area about the use cases that we're doing, about the outcomes that we're looking at. Now, when we talk about adoption has gone in these sort of bursts and then it's sort of slowed down again. It's going off into another burst again. And there's sort of the two sort of people in that camp. There's either the embracers of it and there's those that are super, super cautious about what they're doing. We're seeing a lot around the embraces coming from certain European countries, like the UK. We're seeing Spain, we're seeing some other big cities start to sort of really show their level of support of what they can see in terms of the outcome. Now, what I've got on screen here is not an exhaustive list. It is very much just a point in time to let everybody know where we're sitting. I would say Spain has been a great advocate of AI, particularly in the financial services sector. They've got an AI innovation centre set up in the north of the country. SetBlack, their FIU, is very much looking into having their own AI to actually help manage the case of the SARS and the suspicious activity reports that come through. We're also seeing in other parts of the world, like Australia and Singapore, that type of mentality as well in terms of using it themselves and therefore being able to understand how the industry sector uses it. If I think about those that are much more cautious in this particular region, two really come to mind. It's the regulators that sit within the Nordics. So, think Denmark, Sweden, these types of countries, where they are still very much trying to understand how the technology works, how the data is trained, what PII is used, where they can actually very much understand what the outcome is and not be a black box. Italy, on the other hand, is very, very much driven by EU GDPR and particularly around data model training. We saw that a few years ago, about a year and a half ago, when OpenAI brought it out. We've seen in the last sort of month or so with DeepSeek about training of people's data and how that gets used. So there's very much the two different camps that are operating in that area. And if we think about that last sort of segment on here, the bottom left here, well, what are these regulators just saying in general about it? The best way I could probably sum it up is it's very much they're trying to understand the outcomes. So while they're not endorsing AI as being the solution you need to use, the same way they've never endorsed any technology as being a way to actually achieve better results within financial crime, they really do want to understand what the outcomes are. They want it to not be a black box. They want to be able to see transparency in how the models have been learned, how the outcomes have been driven, how people have been interacting into that process. And they want to see it auditable. They are very much wanting to be able to evidence at the end of the day, or for the institution to evidence what is actually happening so that the humans are still very much in control. So if we're thinking about the bigger side of AI, we're really talking about AI adoption. So we know that AI right now is not one of those technologies that is a bit of a fad and it's going to sort of fade away. If anything, it is continuing to evolve in 6-month increments in terms of the techniques that are used and its ability to retrieve the right type of answers and the right type of outcomes that suits each of the individual institutions that are implementing it for what they're doing. Now, on the left-hand side here, really want to talk you through this little process. And this is what a lot of institutions are doing when they're looking at AI adoption. They're going in and they're, first of all, starting at the top center of this left-hand sort of cycle. They're really trying to assess what their data quality is. From there, they're understanding what's happening around their company processes, what needs to happen internally. Is it something to do with an IT team? Are they doing something externally? Do they have to put together a business case? From there, they're really moving through to what does the governance look like around AI, around the data, around the outcomes. And then that leads them more so into you've got something in place. You're now starting to look at models, the training requirements, the different components that are going to continue to evolve and mature as the AI continues to learn through your organization. Now, the human part of all of this is throughout the entire process, and it is very much through the process around training of staff and resources that are available to one, not only utilize the technology, but to use it and to interact with it. And those other sort of areas that we're starting to see creep up around sort of like quality assurance teams or more so the data science teams in order to understand what the models are doing, if there's any type of data drift that's been moving or any other bias that's creeping into the data, might be already an underlying bias. These are some of the skill sets that need to be able to be evaluated and then move back through that cycle in terms of taking in further data to be able to utilize around that process. Now, all of that is just on the left-hand side. That is sort of the cycle that people are going through in terms of what are they thinking about in doing it. On the right-hand side, you see a little bit of an AI maturity curve here. And from an industry perspective, we see people at different stages of this particular maturity curve for each product or each section of what happens in, say, an AMLA lifecycle or a fraud lifecycle or perhaps in sanctions. And there's no one right or wrong answer in terms of where you are. You could be very much, towards the right-hand side of this maturity curve, or maybe in the middle right-hand side for, say, transaction monitoring, which is probably one of the best use cases we've seen developed out around AI, machine learning, predictive and generative AI. But maybe perhaps in some of the other areas, say in your KYC areas, you're more so sitting more in that left-hand side, that silo data. Now, there's no particular right or wrong answer. It's about the journey that you're taking and understanding what you're doing as you're moving through that curve and as you're improving the technology and you're improving the knowledge of your function to be able to produce the right types of outcomes at the end of the day that help to drive better efficiencies, better operating performances, the right type of outcomes, lowering things like false positives, but also to drive out the right type of cost operating models and things like that. But when I said people are at different stages of that maturity curve, I want to give you a bit of a sort of snapshot of what people are saying when they are actually adopting AI and they're looking at different things. I've kind of bucketed into these 6 areas. I think they kind of capture fairly good assessment of what's going on. So things like, the regulatory concerns, are they AI ready? They're looking at things around AI agents. They're looking at things around the governance. All of these are different areas they're really trying to get their head around and improve as they go through that AI journey. Again, there's no one right type of answer in here. It's about everyone's on a little bit of a different cycle of what that journey actually looks like. End on here is, well, how are the RegTechs in the industry really responding to what we're seeing around regulation? And for me, that's very much a part of they're engaging with the market, they're engaging with financial institutions, they're engaging with the regulators. But at the same time, they're also educating. So they're doing know-how sessions. I know we certainly do that with the regulators. We hold roundtables. We do a show and tell with them. And we help explain and educate what's happening in the movements and the techniques that's happening around AI. We're also out there promoting and very much talking about what's value-driven use cases, but equally talking about what the design, the development is. And we're focusing very much on transparency, the ethics side of it. And all of that is leading us down the path around user trust, user safety, sort of enhancement of that confidence in how the technology is being looked at, embraced, and moved forward with.